You're listening to the Golden Rule of Selling podcast. You'll hear interviews and advice from actual customers so you can learn more about the way they want to be treated and you can start outshining your competitors. I'm Katie Mullen, your host and personal sales trainer. I've got so much experience that smartphones weren't even invented when I started selling stuff. I'm glad you're here. Welcome back, everyone, to the Golden Rule of Selling podcast. I'm your host, Katie Mullen, and I'm so excited to present episode 2 to you. So as I shared on the last episode, during my many hours of calling and prospecting customers that I've done over my years, I began to wonder what customers really thought about salespeople. If I could get inside their head, what would they be thinking about our sales team and our approach? You know, like what would they say? Would they say, "Oh, this guy's a big bozo," or this, I can't stand listening to this girl," or would they be thinking, "Oh yeah, I really like this"? And would they be thinking, "Gosh, that irritates me when salespeople do that. Why can't they stop doing that?" So I really felt like if we could understand that, we could really have a better relationship with these customers. So this curiosity led me to eventually start my own consulting company called MMS Consulting. So I eventually left my sales position and started my own company. And this began a 3+ year research project where I went out and asked hundreds of customers in over 20 states a standard list of questions. Questions about cold calling and pet peeves and LinkedIn preferences and much more. And we talked about this a little bit on the first podcast. But, generally customers were very willing to talk to me, and I gathered a huge amount of data from all of this research calls that I made. So today, in this podcast about the fine art of the cold call, I want to share just a little bit of that data with you and specifically talk about the cold calling portion of the sales process. And so I'm going to be starting a series, and today will be the first in the series, about cold calling. And, because the way I see it, cold calling is truly an art form. And honestly, most salespeople aren't very excited about doing it. Some are even scared to do it if they're really being honest with themselves. Call reluctance is real. So the thing is, some people have some talent to do it or even some willingness to do it, but really it's a skill. So sort of think of it like basketball. So take my son, for example. From a young age, we could tell that he was going to be really good at basketball. He just had a talent for it. But that didn't mean that he just grew up knowing how to have the perfect shot. I had to spend a lot of time with him, teaching him how to keep his elbow parallel to the ground and positioned at a 90-degree angle and take off correctly from the waist. And yes, I do have a big lot of experience doing basketball, so I was able to teach him all these things. But if I hadn't taught him all these things, all he would have would be an unnurtured talent for basketball. He wouldn't really have the skill for basketball. But I did spend the time teaching him that. And now he does have the correct form, and now he is combined that with his talent, and now he executes it very well, and he'll have games where he scores 20 plus points a game. So, that's how sales is, especially cold calling. You might have the talent, but there's also skill involved, and I can teach you that skill. In fact, that's my specialty. And I am a keynote speaker and a sales trainer, and a large part of my training and what I do is based around this topic. It's based around the skills of cold calling. So let's get into now the customer research. One of the questions I asked my customers was, do you get cold calls on the phone from people that you've never met before? And if so, what are your pet peeves? There was one thing I heard very consistently, and that was negative selling. Customers really, really hate this. And I find that so interesting because sometimes from the very first call, you'll hear all kinds of bad things about their current vendor. "Oh, I hate my current vendor. The battery doesn't last very long and they won't even call me back." Or, maybe you'll hear things about, we didn't get what we thought we were getting. They messed up the quote and now nobody's happy about it. Or, they keep breaking and their service is terrible. Whatever it is, we hear these things as salespeople, and then we are tempted to go back out and tell everyone, "Oh, you should talk to such and such customer. They've had terrible time with their vendor." But here's the thing. It's sort of like your family. You're allowed to talk bad about your family. You're allowed to bad talk your sister and say how annoying she is. But if your best friend starts getting egged on and saying, oh yeah, I hate your sister too. Well, that's not allowed. You can't, I can talk bad about my sister, but you can't talk bad about about my sister. And that's how customers are too. Even if they badmouth their current vendor, you shouldn't under any circumstances. Not only did customers consistently bring this up as a pet peeve, but think about it. They were probably heavily involved in the choosing of that vendor. So even though they have some dissatisfaction that they're happy to share with you, if you chime in and say, oh, they're the worst, I've heard so many other bad things about them, you're kind of calling them an idiot. You're kind of saying, I don't know why anyone would choose this vendor. And they'll end up feeling like they have to defend their current vendor. And the last thing you want them to do is feel like they should have to be defending what really is your competition. So, I think sometimes the reason salespeople make this mistake is that they kind of pride themselves on being a upfront person and, shooting it straight. But customers they do not see it this way. They don't see it that you're shooting them straight. They take it as you're bad-mouthing your competition, which is really like their family, unfortunately, because their equipment is still at the hospital. It might be family that they don't really want in the long term, but they can't avoid the fact that that is their family at this given time, since their product is still in their hospital. So they don't like it. It is not a great way to help you build trust at all. So instead, if they start bad-mouthing your competition or their current vendor, use silence. Just allow them to keep talking. You should nod and take diligent notes because they're telling you exactly what you're going to need to win that sale down the road. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's fast forward. Now you've gotten all this information from this one particular customer, but you're still going to need to talk to other people, most likely within the facility. Well, now you're armed with all this great information about all the problems, and you can kind of use that to poke. And let's say, for example, they're having problems with their battery. Well, then when you go to talk to this customer that you haven't talked to, but it's in the same facility, then you got to really just hammer on that battery and talk about your battery and all the great things about that battery. And then magically, the new customer that you're talking to, it sort of feels like you're just magically hitting on all their pain points. And they're going to just think, wow, this is the monitor for me or the device for me because, they're hitting on all the things that really bother me. So take those notes, encourage them to keep going and ask follow-up questions. But silence is even better when they're bad-mouthing the customer and telling you all their problems, because if you become involved in the conversation, it'll kind of make them want to stop talking. They might even realize they're sharing too much bad stuff about the competitor, and it'll kind of make them defensive. So keep them from getting defensive by resisting the urge to chime in at all. Silent nodding and or oh, those are your best friends during this conversation. And again, take those notes and keep track of them so you can come back to them later. So that is the main pet peeve we heard was bad-mouthing the competition. Another thing that customers said they really didn't like that salespeople do all the time, and salespeople generally, from what I can tell, have no idea that this is a problem, is they start the call by mentioning someone in common that you know. So let's say, for example, you go to a conference and you meet someone and you start telling them about your products, and this person gets real excited. Let's say his name is John Smith. And John says, oh, great, we really need that. We hate our current vendor. And he starts telling you all this stuff about why they hate your vendor and they hate their current vendor. And he gets real excited about your product. But he says, I'm going to tell you, though, I'm not, in charge. I'm just one of the nurses. What you really need to do when you get back is you need to call Monica. She's the charge nurse, and she'll be really excited to talk to you. And you're like, great, I have this great lead. It's not a cold call anymore. It's more of a warm call. And so you have a great in. So you get back and you call Monica and you say, oh, I just got home from this conference. I met John Smith and he told me to call you. But the problem is Monica isn't annoyed. She's not happy. She's not happy at all to talk to you. She's actually sounds a little bit annoyed to talk to you, because John Smith didn't come back and tell her anything about your conversation. And here's the thing. she's going to assume that you're lying, that you're making up this connection with John Smith. And it's not fair because you really did have this conversation with John Smith. But the problem is, what customers told me consistently is that unfortunately, salespeople do often lie about these connections. They pretend to know someone or they exaggerate the conversation they've had with someone, and they've gotten caught. And so it's made customers very leery of this. So she's going to unfairly assume that you're lying or exaggerating this conversation that you've had with John Smith, and she's immediately defensive and assuming you're just a pushy, annoying salesperson that she wants to get rid of. So customers really do not like this. So I would really highly recommend against ever calling and saying, about somebody that you've met. I heard it very consistently during my calls. So what should you do though? Because you can't just forget about this conversation with John Smith. You have all this great information and you have a potential customer here. So here's the way you can handle it. Number one, and this is the absolute best case scenario, is as you're talking to John Smith, encourage him to write an email to Monica. Maybe you guys can even do it while you're standing there and have him say, hey, Monica, I just got done talking to Katie Mullen from such and such company. They have this great product. Is it okay if she calls you? Well, that's perfect. That's ideal because then, and have him copy you, hopefully. And then hopefully she'll write back and say, sure, have her call me. Now you have a great in. And that really is super effective. This is ideal. If you can't get that, and you're not going to always get that, in fact, that's probably going to be more rare. But so if you cannot get that, you're just going to have to start having that conversation with Monica. You're going to have to start it as a cold call. Do not mention the conversation you had with John Smith. Just introduce yourself, start down the process, but use the information that he gave you to really try to get her interested. So take those things that he said that they would really like about your product and lead with those things. And hopefully, as you go down the line and she starts to trust you, you can mention that you did have that. Oh yeah, I did have a conversation with John Smith actually at a conference we were at, and he mentioned that. But just, you cannot lead with it. Absolutely no leading with it. It's so much better to do that than it is to come in hot saying how, oh yeah, John Smith, he and I are great friends. Now, this is especially true if you happen to know John Smith socially. Under no circumstances should you ever call a customer and say, oh, John Smith is my neighbor. We were just at a barbecue together and he was telling me that, that you probably buy some equipment that I sell and that I should call you. Ooh, that would be terrible. Do not do that. Okay. So that was pet peeve number 2. Pet peeve number 3 is when salespeople are too pushy. Now, this is kind of a given. Everyone kind of knows this in theory, but it really does happen a lot. And a lot of customers mention this. But here's the thing. I don't actually think that salespeople really generally, I'm sure there are exceptions, but I think generally they don't ever try to be pushy. I think more often than not, it's a nervous thing, especially during that first initial cold call, which most people do think is very scary. And it's just uncomfortable. And because it's scary and uncomfortable, they don't do it a lot. So they don't have a lot of practice. Most salespeople actually say that they would rather clean out their office or do an expense report rather than make those prospecting calls. So that means they're just not getting that practice, that repetition like my son needed for his, to get the correct shot. And you need that repetition to be good at cold calling. So you don't think of it as scary, maybe in theory, but think about when you first start to pick up that phone and your heart starts racing and you hear that laundry machine ping in the background. Okay, well, maybe my laundry needs to be folded. I'm going to prioritize that instead of doing those cold calls. So the best way to not come off as nervous, and that means you're not going to come off as pushy, is to focus on speaking really slowly. And it's hard. Trust me, you might be able to notice from my podcast that I have a tendency to talk really fast also. And I've had to work on it really, really carefully over the years and make sure that I'm not speaking too quickly. Of course, you don't want to talk too slow, but, painfully slow. But another great tip is to look in a mirror as you're making the calls and smile. It sounds weird, but it does work. You're going to sound a lot friendlier and not pushy if you're smiling. Or get up and walk, get an earpiece and smile as you walk around your living room. Of course, that's a little harder because as they start to tell you things, you're going to need to take notes. But, just even for the beginning part of the call, look out the window at the green grass and the birds chirping and smile, and you're going to sound not pushy. So those are my 3 tips on how to avoid doing the pet peeves that customers do not like. As I mentioned, this is going to be the first in a series I'm going to do on the fine art of cold calling. I'll be doing a second in the series in the coming weeks. And of course, I have a lot more information that I cover during my sales training, which I can now do virtually, by the way. So if you are interested, you can go to my webpage, which is goldenartofselling.com, and you will find show notes in there. And you'll find information on how to reach out to me. I have a video in there that you can look at on how just getting more information about, and feel free to reach out and find out how I can help your sales team. So next week, we're going to be talking to a customer, which I'm very excited about. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And he's going to be sharing some really valuable information to you. So you'll be able to hear all these things and more directly from a customer. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to the Fine Art of the Cold Call podcast. This will be the first session on this. I will be doing another session covering some other aspects of cold calling in the coming weeks. But just keep in mind that this is really just scratching the surface of cold calling. There's so much more I can teach you. And I do have an entire keynote session devoted in my speaking business. So if you would like to talk to me about coming in and customizing a presentation to talk to your sales team about cold calling and really helping them figure out how to uncover those important leads, build their pipeline, and really mine their funnel, I would be so delighted to talk to you. So you can find me on that at goldenruleofselling.com. And you can also find me at my consulting website, and that's www.mms-consulting.com, and you can reach out to me there. So anyway, I would love to talk with you about helping your teams. Thanks so much, all. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Golden Rule of Selling podcast. If you want to hear more customer interviews and advice, please subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And I hope you'll consider leaving a review. I would really appreciate it. Lastly, all my podcasts are based on my extensive sales training program. If you're interested in learning more about bringing me in to provide your team with a customized sales training program, which I can do virtually, please be in touch. You can find me at goldenruleofselling@gmail.com, and you can find out more about my consulting company at mms-consulting.com. And if you want to see the show notes, please visit our website at goldenruleofselling.com. Have a great week.